Hi, welcome everybody to the Metropolitan Governance Task Force meeting for this Wednesday, December 6th. And sorry for the delay in getting going. We have a number of people that are joining us online today. That includes Senator Dibble. We have Commissioner Bingham, Senator Coleman, Mr. Reed, and also Ms. Pereira Webb, and if I left anyone out, I apologize. We have a couple of important agenda items today that we'll get right into. First, I wanted to ask if a member has a motion to adopt the minutes from our previous meeting of November 29th. Okay, thank you. Ms. Paddock moves the minutes. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, the motion prevails. So our next item of business, just to update us on our public engagement. And again, I have to emphasize how the critical work that Ms. Kohler has been doing on this issue. And just in time, we have Commissioner Green. And our first meeting is going to be on the 8th, this coming Friday. I'm encouraged that almost everybody is available for that. I know Ms. Beckman isn't here, but I wanted to just, on the record, thank her for her excellent work in helping us with both the arrangements for this first meeting in St. Paul, but also guiding us through some key people in St. Paul to invite, and many of them are there. I think we have about 15 people signed up already, so if you know people in that area or anywhere throughout the metro who wants to come on Friday the 8th, please encourage them. And also, this is an opportunity to thank Representative Wiens and Commissioner Bingham for their work for the meeting on the following Thursday at Lake Elmo, and we're working now turning our attention to the January meetings as well. So please promote these, and if you have ideas and suggestions, contact me and Ms. Kohler and Senator Pratt as well. So with that, I want to move to the next item. I asked members of the committee if you had different people that you thought we should hear from, or experts, or perspectives perhaps that we haven't heard that you think we should hear. We still have time for that. And so I did set aside some time today for a couple of suggestions from Mayor Hovland. So Mayor Hovland, being a mayor, has been involved nationally with other leaders of local government, and has graciously suggested, and we followed his suggestion, to invite the mayors of two of the former mayors, I should say, of two of the communities that we have discussed. Again, of course, many models of governance throughout the country. We did choose to, and we could be doing that for years, really, but we did choose two that we thought were instructive for us. As you know, we spent quite a bit of time with people from Portland and from Denver, and but Mayor Hovland suggested that we talk to the former mayors of those two communities, and he has brought them to us. So we're going to spend the first half hour today hearing from both of them. And Mayor Hovland, I think you wanted to make an introduction here. We're going to start with the former mayor of Portland, Charles Hales, and then we'll move on to the former mayor of Denver, Michael Hancock, who are joining us today. And I thank both of these former mayors for taking the time. I think they have been briefed both by Mayor Hovland and Ms. Kohler in terms of the work of our task force and our goals. So we appreciate their perspective. Mayor Hovland, are you on the line? Did you want to introduce our guests, or at least our first guest?
I am here, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that opportunity to introduce these two really fine former mayors and outstanding citizens now of not only their respective communities, but our country. So my experience with them, as you have pointed out, Mr. Chair, comes through being fellow mayors. Charlie Hales, as he would be wanting to be called, had over a decade of service as a city council member in Portland, and then one term as mayor. Recognized, I think, as being the person who started the streetcar system and did many park improvements in a relatively short career, had some pretty remarkable things that he unfolded. And over the years, I've gotten to know him quite well. He works for a large engineering company now that does work on a global basis called HDR, and they're typically at the U.S. Conference of Mayors meetings, and we talked about this effort on the part of the legislature in Minnesota to look at the governance model for the Metropolitan Council, and it struck me that, as you pointed out, Mr. Chair, when we looked at other models around the country with a little bit closer eye on Portland Metro and TriMet, and then on the Dr. Cog model in Denver, that these two former mayors would add to that richness of the information that we've been able to receive. And so first I welcome Charlie Hales, who now I think is in the Bahamas for the winter, but nonetheless agreed to join us today. And we'll talk about his views on their governance model in the Portland area, both Portland Metro and TriMet, and then we'll turn to former Mayor Hancock that I worked closely with as his vice chair on transportation for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. But first we'll go with Charlie Hales. Charlie, welcome and thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you to the chairs and to the task force and to you, Mayor Jim, as a colleague. Once a mayor, always a mayor, and it's always good to brainstorm with you, and I appreciate the chance to provide my perspective to the task force today. As you know, I've got some slides. I'll endeavor to share my screen, and I think I have. Let's see if I have. There we go. Are you able to see those?
We are.
Okay. So I'm a bit of a ringer, if I might say, in addition to having served as a mayor. When I was getting into my 1966 Plymouth Valiant in 1979, moving to Portland, if someone said you're going to spend 45 years of your career dealing with regional governance and regional planning, I would have said, what? But that's how it's worked out. Because in the 1980s, I was the lobbyist for the Regional Home Builders Association and was very involved in the whole issues of growth management and the urban growth boundary in its early years. Then while I was still working for the Home Builders Association, I was appointed to the committee that was set up to draft a home rule charter proposal for Metro, which I helped draft and that we sent to the voters and was approved. Then while I was serving as city commissioner in those years that Jim described, I was the chair of the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, the local government table, if you will, at Metro, and served on JPACT, their equivalent of your TAB, the Transportation Board. And then at HDR, I've worked on transit projects all over the U.S. and Canada and China, and then also more recently on regional planning projects in China, Canada, and of all places, Saudi Arabia. So in one capacity or another, I've been grappling with these issues of growth management and regional governance in lots of different places, lots of different iterations. But of course, my grounding is in Portland. And you know a lot about Portland and the Twin Cities area. Have conferred a lot with each other over the years and learned a lot from each other, and maybe this is some more of that. And you know that real drivers behind the original land use scheme in Oregon that was adopted in the 70s, just before I got there, was to avoid the loss of farmland and to try to avoid sprawl. And so the ideas, the fundamental ideas of an urban growth boundary and a regional plan and transit were already in play by the time I got to Oregon. And then again, in the early years, we adopted our 2040 plan, the original version of our 2040 plan that I worked on as chair of IMPACT. It was, as you can see here, a typical kind of centers and corridors blob plan that said this blob ought to be a concentration of density and activity, and that one should be at a different scale, and the downtown core should be the biggest blob and the biggest concentration of density of all. And we ought to have this urban growth boundary to protect that farmland outside of it. And this was adopted and then put in play in terms of local plans conforming to the regional plan. We have much of the armature of regional transit that we intended to bind all that together, just as you have in the Twin Cities. And in the city of Portland itself, we really focused on traditional neighborhoods, reinforcing them, the whole 20-minute neighborhood idea, and to say to the region, we'll take more growth than you might have thought in the core city, and we've got some ideas for how we're going to do that by increasing densities and the diversity of housing types, and by infilling where we can, and then taking opportunity sites like the Pearl District in northwest Portland, where we took an old rail yard and built a world-class, in my opinion, transit-oriented development neighborhood, and the South Waterfront, where we took some scroungy old industrial land and built an extension of our university and a lot of high-density neighborhood development there as well. But in our neighborhood, as I said, we tried to take corridors that were auto-oriented and nothing special and make them walkable and denser in terms of the types and diversity of housing in those neighborhoods. And we've done a lot of that. And a lot of those neighborhood main streets like mine are now great places to walk. I can walk to my grocery store and my hardware store and my doctor and my dentist and my even my veterinarian from my house, and it's because of this kind of lively corridor that we've revitalized across the city. And so that was the idea. We've executed a lot of that idea. In more recent years, you can really see the evidence of how well that's working in the suburban communities, not just in the core cities. Some in places like downtown Gresham or downtown Hillsborough or downtown Milwaukee, Oregon, there's a lot of great new moderate scale TOD development and a higher quality of life by far than they enjoyed before these decades of regional planning and regional transit. In places like Hancock Station, we've taken greenfield sites in the suburbs and built really full new neighborhoods. So there's been a lot of success in terms of the physical result of this planning regime. And then there's been some refinement of the scheme over time. Again, here's the old version of the 2040 plan, the centers and corridors plan. Well, the current version looks a little different because those blobs turned into specific land use plans for each of those regional centers, town centers, and the urban core. And then you'll see some different colors around the outside of the urban growth boundary now, a dark green that constitutes the regional green spaces program, which Metro was later able to implement, acquiring and taking into public ownership large areas of natural resource land outside of the urban growth boundary. The light green areas are rural reserves, areas of farmland and forest land that are intended to not get developed and not get added to the urban growth boundary. And the tan areas are urban reserves, areas where the region is signaling, yes, your land is someday going to come into the urban growth boundary, get urban services, and be urbanized. This whole scheme, by the way, of the urban growth boundary and the regional plan in Portland, it's got a lot of metrics that I think support it. My favorite metric is that we've expanded the region's population in the years I'm talking about by 60% and expanded the urban growth boundary by 14%. So I think that indicates that we've accomplished a lot in terms of farmland preservation and smarter growth. That's the of the Portland story. And I know we're going to dive right into the questions of governance. And as I mentioned, I've been immersed in that over the years as a member of that charter committee that drafted the charter, as a local government member of MPAC and JPAC, and then again as a consultant working around the world trying to help people get to the results they want. I would just, I guess, close and open our discussion about these issues with a couple of points, and that is when we think about governance in an issue like this, about how does a region govern itself in an agenda like this, I would urge you to not fall into the error of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And that is, I would urge you to think about this question on two planes or along two axes. One is the plane of fairness and justice. And that is, of course, whatever governance model you have or that you modify should take all perspectives into account, should listen, should confer, should strive towards justice, inclusion, and fairness. And those are all wonderful ideals. No governance model achieves them perfectly, but we should always be arcing towards them, if you will. But the other plane or the other axis is effectiveness. And that is, I would urge you to ask yourself a couple of hard questions. That is, has the Met Council, as now constituted, met the challenges of the past in terms of your growth management and transportation and environmental agenda? And is it equipped to shape the future that you want? Because the hardest thing in government is not coming up with good policy. The hardest thing is getting it implemented. And one of the success stories of the Portland story is that Metro, in its iterations over time, has had the authority to move us in the direction that we wanted to go, that we wanted to build a regional transit system. We wanted to hold the urban growth boundary and keep the farmland. We wanted to have a shared burden of increased density and intensity in each of our communities and the shared benefits of that. And so I want to urge you to think particularly clearly about the effectiveness issue or the effectiveness plane, because if you have perfect representation and no results, you don't have success. So with that, that provocative statement or two, I'll be happy to dialogue further, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Mayor. You really teed up our next agenda item after you, and after we ask you some questions and we hear a presentation from Mayor Hancock in Denver. That's exactly one of the things we want to talk about today, some of the values issues that you raised. So we'll take a couple questions from members. First, we have Professor Orfield.
Mayor, tell me about the home rule process in Portland. Was that a good process? What was important about it? Do you think that it allowed the public to participate in the future of the Metropolitan Council?
Yes, Myron, good to hear from you. You know, I would say, to be honest, the home rule process, the creation of the home rule charter, was not terribly inclusive. We didn't have the kind of public engagement that I think you're involved with your effort, or that is more typical today. Yes, of course, there was a public outreach. Of course, there was outreach to the local governments, you know, as the charter committee did its work. But it was a committee appointed by the state to come up with or appointed by Metro actually, to come up with a charter for Metro and send it to the voters. So it was ultimately a political act of, here's the charter we think we should have as a region. You as voters have a chance to vote on it because it was approved by the voters of the region. So that was the ultimate public engagement in the proposed home rule charter. I think it has worked well for Metro to, you know, have its own constitutional basis in the form of a charter approved by the voters, and which of course also created the elected council positions and so on. It probably has given Metro a little more heft in its ability to carry forward the regional agenda and to push past objections from this or that special interest, and also to be properly insulated from legislative interference. Obviously, Metro was originally created by the legislature. The land use laws are adopted by the legislature. The legislature has its say, but I think it's appropriate that the child was emancipated, if you will, and that Metro was given its own authority to do its own work as defined by state law and then as further enhanced by the charter itself.
Thank you for the question, Professor Orfield, and thank you, Mayor Hales. I just wanted to let the committee know that next week, we are going to have at least one national expert on the Home Rule Charter process talk to us, because this actually was the Senate position on metropolitan governance. The House position was to create this process, but as it was the Senate position, we want to spend time on this. I mean, we had actually mentioned this as one of the options in actually the legislation for this task force to consider. So, in addition to elected Met Council, COGS, staggered terms with local governments, appointing members, a home rule charter is certainly something that we should be considering. So, Mayor, I'm glad that you mentioned that. Professor Orfield, I'm glad you asked about it. If you have a quick follow-up, we'll take that, and then Ms. Paddock, and we'll probably need to move on after that. Professor.
Yes, Mr. Hales, I think we met back in the 90s a few times.
We did.
Yeah. I'm wondering whether you think electing our council is a good idea, or should we keep it appointed the way that it is?
Yeah, I don't feel qualified to opine on your politics in that question. I will say that, again, I think it has worked reasonably well for us to have an elected council, and it has probably enhanced the effectiveness of Metro. There's some tricks to that, and I'll get kind of blunt about this. The city of Portland has just approved a terrible charter change, which is going to make the members of the city council more numerous and better paid and do less work. That's a really bad combination and an imitation of Congress. And that is, I'm afraid that this new system, for the people that get elected to those offices, will conclude that this is the best job and the best paycheck they'll ever have, and they'll do whatever it takes to hang on to that position. If that sounds like the United States Congress, well, I think it should. So the Metro councilors are not terribly well paid. They're paid enough to make it possible for people to serve, but I think it's fair to say that for most of those people, it's not the best or most lucrative job they'll ever have. So having elected positions is one thing, compensating them, calibrating the compensation so that it's fair and reasonable to people who give their time to the community, but also doesn't create a sinecure, is an art form. And again, I would say in the recent charter change in Portland, that's a failure. In the case of Metro, the Metro Council, I'd say it's been a success. So again, having them be elected has some merit. Let me go off on a slightly different plane, but I think it'll make sense. Whether they're elected or not, what's worked particularly well in Portland is that there is a deliberate constructive dialogue between the Metro Council and local government through two key committees, one of which is like TAB, of course, where you, Mayor Hovland, served. We have the Metro Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation. That's where all the local governments do the log rolling, figure out what the regional transportation agenda is, agree on it, and take it to our congressional delegation. And then there's the Metro Policy Advisory Committee, which is the land use side of that. You've probably heard about all this from Lynn Peterson. And that's the committee that I chaired that supervises the original development and then later modification over time of the regional growth plan. In both of those cases, there's a folk way. One, Metro councilors serve on both committees, so it's a mixture of local elected officials and Metro councilors, a subset of the council. And there's a folk way that what JPAC agrees on, the Metro Council is going to approve. And what MPAC agrees on for the regional land use plan, unless there's something outrageously wrong, the Metro Council is going to approve it. So there's an understanding that although the Metro Council has ultimate authority, and they're elected by the people and they have a job to do, they have to listen to, confer with, negotiate with, and get to yes with at least the majority of local elected officials in the region. And that has held by and large. that we don't have people that are just, taking their ball and going home and objecting to what Metro does. We have generally, we have a consensus political culture like you do in Minnesota. We have generally been able to get to yes between the local governments as constituents of the regional process and the Metro Council as the stewards of that process. The fact that the Metro councilors are elected has probably been helpful to that. So I'd say by and large, I think that's been a success.
Thank you. Is there anyone else beside Ms. Paddock that had a question? Okay, we'll do Ms. Paddock and Chair Cleavorn, and then we'll move on.
He actually answered my question.
Oh, great. That's great. So the last question or comment belongs to Chair Cleavorn.
Thank you, and I really appreciate your being with us today and helping us understand how this has worked in Portland. Just two really quick questions. I have always had concerns about conflict of interest, and we've talked about you have the constituents who elect you and the constituent and the work that you have to do for the region. So making sure that that balance is in place, I would like to hear what you think about that. And then also, I think I just heard you say that local governments as constituents. So just I'm always trying to figure out in this process, when you have these governance councils, agencies, whatever we want to call them, who do you consider to be the constituent? Thank you.
Excellent question, Mayor.
Yeah, sure. I think it's twofold. Of course, if you're in a position of responsibility, whether you're a Metro councilor or a local government official, your citizens are your constituents. So those Metro councilors have citizens in their districts, and they need to respond to them. But those local governments as entities and as implementers of this planning agenda need our constituents as well. So I'd say it's both. I mean, again, one political dynamic that maybe has been described to you, but I want to make sure you understand that's worked well for us is we have again, I want to emphasize that effectiveness plane. What do you need to accomplish as a region in terms of growth management and transportation and everything? And is the model that you're devising or remodeling going to be equal to the task? Do they have the authority to push through the difficult decisions? And Metro has had that authority. They control the urban growth boundary. Yeah, they've expanded it 36 times, but they have that authority. Yeah, they get to tell us as cities and counties, you have to increase your density, or we're not going to approve your plan. And that is both threatening to local officials and extraordinarily useful. And I always called it the Metro made me do it defense. So if you have to do something hard, like put transit into a place that people are wary of it, or add density to a place that's not familiar with it, having Metro be able to say, we actually have the authority to require you to do this, provides wonderful cover for your constituent, that mayor or that city council. Hasn't always worked, by the way. I showed you a pretty picture of downtown Milwaukee. I was elevated a year early to be the chair of the League of Oregon, the president of the League of Oregon Cities, because the guy who was supposed to be the president of the League of Oregon Cities was the mayor of Milwaukee, Oregon, the suburb immediately south of my neighborhood. And Craig Lomnicki and 3 members of his city council were recalled from office because they supported light rail. So it hasn't always, the Metro made me do it defense hasn't always protected local governments who are trying to play nicely in the regional arena. But I think setting up a dynamic in which there's enough authority at the region, at the Met Council, whether they're elected or appointed, enough authority to get the job done, actual intentional dialogue with local governments to make sure that they're in the consensus, and then the ability to implement the thing. Those to me are really important. And I guess part of why I'm so fervent about this is I've been involved both in transit projects around the US and in planning projects around the world where the authority to get the good thing done didn't actually exist. And so they ended up with a beautiful shelf study in a place they were unhappy with rather than the future that they really wanted.
A follow-up, Chair.
Yeah, this is just on the effectiveness plane, and I totally agree with your answer about the effectiveness plane. But one of the questions I would have about that, you can have really great policy, but if you don't have the financial resources to implement them, then you can be blamed and for not being effective, right? But the purse
Absolutely.
belongs to someone else. So how do you balance that effectiveness playing when you really don't have the power of the purse?
Absolutely. No, money matters, and God bless the child who's got her own, right? I mean, one of the reasons we've been successful in our transit agenda is that TriMet has a regional payroll tax that was approved by the legislature and doesn't have to go to the voters. Thank God for that, because we would have never been able to build 2 miles of light rail if we hadn't had that. So, so the financial piece, having either the Met Council or someone, but in your case, it would be the Met Council, have both the authority and the money to implement the agenda is required.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, well, Mayor, thank you, and this was really, really good. And I think you've hit on some issues that we've been grappling with and kind of in a new and refreshing way that we haven't heard yet. And I think it is really good to get your perspective as the leader of a local government who's, interacted with a model that, we are, that we have been considering. So, and I also thought the Home Rule Charter conversation was good, and I know that when you were talking about controversial transit projects and controversial growth boundaries, we have a couple of members here on our task force that are very familiar with that, who are sitting to my left here, and I think we're listening intently to your response. So, Mayor Hovland, thank you. You really brought to us a very valuable perspective, and I appreciate that from Portland. And so now we're going to have our second
Charlie.
guest. Oh, go ahead, sorry. Do you have any final closing comments, Mayor?
Oh, no, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to all of you, thank you for the work you're doing. Your region has done great work over time, and I know you're all there because you want that to continue and to even get better. If I can be of further help along the way, formally or informally, please don't hesitate to call on me, and I know that Mayor Hovland will whenever he gets the chance.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Again, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So now we will have the former mayor of Denver, Michael Hancock, engage with us in a similar way. He'll have a brief overview of comments, and then we'll have some brief questions. And again, our focus is really on governance. Mayor, welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record, and just as we had people from the Portland Metro, current Portland Metro present to us, last week we had both people from DRCOG and the RTD brief us. So you're coming kind of on the heels of that conversation. So we'd certainly like your perspective on governance issues in Denver. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this opportunity. And let me just send a shout out to my good friend, Mayor Hovland out there in Adina. It's good to see you as well. We had a couple of good years together, really standing in the gap for cities around the country, particularly on the federal infrastructure bill that we wanted to make sure came directly to our regions and to our cities. I think Mayor Hales, set the stage very well. I'll add some narrative to him, and I'm glad you started with him first. Obviously, he had a real in-depth discussion about regional councils and their role and how they can pull us together. And I'll add some narrative to it and then try to answer some questions for you. You may have, when you had the DRCOG on from Denver, learned, of course, Denver is the big behemoth in the metro region. It is one of only 2 strong mayor forms of government in the state of Colorado. Only one of 3 now, and one of only 2 city and county combined governing organizations or cities and county in the region. Which means that we can we can really dominate the region in terms of our ability to collect these federal resources and allocate them. But what the Regional Council of Governments does for us as a metro region is it really helps us to live out the values of what I think Mayor Hales talked about. We don't compete as individual cities anymore or compete against individual cities either. Whether we are trying to attract federal resources to our cities for transit or for improvement of other infrastructure, or we're trying to bring that big industry to our city. It's really the fact that we compete as regions now. And those principals and stakeholders want to know, whether you're at the federal government or you are from Corporation X, how well do you collaborate? How well do you cooperate that we can maximize the utility of these limited resources and we can get the best out of the investment in terms of the infrastructure. And that's what Regional Council of Governments has done for us here in Denver. As you may recall, and Dr. Cobb may have talked about it, in 1994, 95, we passed an unprecedented transit bill here in Denver. We could not have done that without a body, a regional body like Dr. Cobb to help guide us through that and to make sure we were planning correctly. It has allowed us to compete, I think, pretty well. We've had unprecedented growth in the metro region, 30% growth over the last decade, which led us to be one of the top 3 cities and metro regions in the country in terms of growth going forward. It also gave me as mayor awareness of what other cities are doing around me in terms of their investment in infrastructure, because those issues are being brought to Dr. Cobb. We're voting on them, and it made a difference. I'll give you an example. Denver and our metro region has one of the longest highways, urban highways in the country, Colfax Avenue. Denver was moving to invest. We were moving to invest in Colfax Avenue, but Dr. Cobb gave us the environment and the table, which you all sit at, to talk about what cities on both ends of that highway were doing and allow us to collaborate through our governing mechanisms on how to work together on our investments and get the best out of those investments and efficiencies by collaborating. So cities of Aurora, cities of the city of Lakewood, and we all came together, Littleton, came together to work together on the improvements along Colfax, bringing BRT, bringing transit, and all those other opportunities. So we compete together to bring these limited funds to Denver, to raise awareness what other cities are doing, and invest in infrastructure, invest in growth, as our Mayor Hales talked about, and collaborate. Now, with regards to governance, this is a regional body. Every city that is on that council gets 1 vote, except for Denver, because we're city and county, and we get 2 votes. But because everyone else gets 1 vote, they almost cancel out that second vote that Denver has, and it's a good balance. Sometimes it can be frustrating for us, if I want to be collectively honest with you, but it also is the proper tool to use because of the size of Denver and because of the attraction Denver has as the big city and county sitting in the region. It allows us to work collaboratively, to be aware of what other cities are doing, but also to make sure that we're investing these limited competitive resources as we bring them into the region and to do it together and to share really our objectives and values as we move forward. But as mayor, I appointed the 2 members of our body to represent the city of Denver. Other cities may have the mayor sitting there. As you may have learned, and former mayors have chaired it, but they may also be council members. They could be county commissioners who sit there. But there's no greater value we bring than the ability to raise awareness and to collaborate. I think Mayor Hales did a phenomenal job of laying out all the technical aspects, but it has been a tremendous asset to Denver. And I think the greatest value is maybe me answering any direct questions you may have going forward.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And I wanted to see if anyone had some questions. We have a couple. We'll start with Ms. Paddock and then Senator Pratt.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor Hancock. My question is on the matrix of efficiency versus participation. How well do you think your governance system works?
I think I would give it on a scale of 1 to 10. I give it a 8.5. I was pretty pleased with it. Like I said, it's not uncommon for cities to want more, but more means we're canceling out maybe somebody else for the sake of our own city. So I think efficiencies is most important here because these resources are limited. And even with the unprecedented infrastructure bill under Biden in this Congress, past Congress, we still are competing for resources. But if we can work together to raise our efficiency of the utility of whatever resources we gain, as well as our own investments, I think the better. So, yeah, while it may be a time or two frustrating because we want more out of it, I can tell you it works for the betterment of the entire region.
Ms. Paddock.
So to phrase it a different way, is it a problem to have 58 members of DRCOG?
Well, that was my frustrating part right there. Yeah, I think not overwhelmingly all the time. I think periodically that occurs where it is a bit frustrating. But again, I'm speaking from the perspective as the major city. I think the other stakeholders, that would be a good question for them. But you know, when you're sitting as the capital city, where most of the impact is occurring in the region, you may believe that you're entitled to more. But I think for the most part, it works well, Ms. Paddock.
Thank you. Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mayor Hancock. You touched on something, and I'm just going to digress here just very briefly. We have a group in my county called SCALE, Scott County Area Leaders for Effectiveness, and we've done some of, I think, what you've talked about, prioritizing at a county level with the local townships and municipalities on road projects and transportation projects, as well as economic development. When you talk about the frustration, is it the size of the council? Because it seems to be a really big council, but yet I was fascinated, and maybe you could delve more deeply into the collaborations that you have, because I think that's one of the things that we've struggled with our Met Council is the collaboration versus the authority and how you make that balance.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that's what Ms. Paddock was driving at. I may have not truly answered the question. I always think that when you pull together a group, size of the group should always be a consideration in terms of your ability to get things done. I think because of the muscle memory here in the region, we have the ability to actually move things forward, and I think a common collective agreement behind the plans that we are executing helps us to do that. So I think no matter what size of the council you're dealing with, if you have a plan that we've all agreed on, that always becomes your tool to bring everyone back together if the thinking and conversation gets off the rail. But size is certainly a consideration, and I always err on the side of a smaller council than a larger council. I don't think I've ever really took into consideration whether or not 58 members is a problem for us. It is large. It might at times be unwieldy, but I'm not sitting in the meetings. There are representatives of mine sitting there, and at times they may have expressed frustration to me just trying to continue to move some things forward, but for the most part, we didn't hear about it very often. And so that to answer your question. But I'll tell you that we were able to pass a $4.8 billion regional transit plan in 1994, with Dr. Carl really being a key stakeholder at the table moving this forward. That doesn't happen without a regional body like DRCOG and their credibility standing behind it and discussing the importance of us doing this regionally and going at it regionally, as opposed to a few cities coming together pushing for it, maybe as a small coalition versus a larger coalition of metropolitan bodies. And I'll tell you, it has led, to your point, I think you make the connection between investment in infrastructure and transit to economic development. Our region has taken off as a result of that investment in transit. Hasn't been without its challenges, but it's been tremendous. And I think it also has led to our growth and really the interest in our metropolitan region in terms of relocation of companies, because their employees are less inclined to be sitting in traffic and being less productive than being able to move about the region on transit systems that really work for them.
Follow-up, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mayor, maybe talk about did you find value at being at the table versus having somebody else represent your interests at the table?
No, I think whoever I appointed, and we had by Denver, our rule is that we had one member of city council represent the city, because they're de facto county commissioners, if you will, and then someone from the mayor's office is a strong mayor form of government. And whoever I designated to send understood exactly what the mission was. And typically it was the executive director of our transportation body, department that would go in and represent us. So I never really had a problem. We talked very regularly. I met with them obviously every month about what the objectives were, and oftentimes we bring issues or items to me regarding DRCOG. We could discuss them and knew exactly where we wanted to go. And the same thing with council. I would meet with the representative and the president of council, and we would do the same with regards to DRCOG, because we typically were on the same page.
And a quick clarifying.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, a quick clarification. I wasn't really talking about your appointment specifically as much as maybe having that direct representation from the council and the county.
Oh, no, not typically at all.
Okay, any further? Okay, appreciate the questions. So we have two more, and then we're going to move on. Chair Cleaverhorn and Commissioner Green.
Right. Thank you very much. And Mayor, it's really great to have you with us, and I appreciate your sharing your expertise with us. In listening both to the presentation last meeting with DRCOG and then hearing the two of you as mayors today, I'm thinking about the difference between our Met Council and the organizations that you're referencing. Our Met Council has a charge which is so much broader, right? They do parks and trails, they do housing, whereas the organizations that we're talking to are really about land use and transportation, which are also in the purview of Met Council. So when you think about this representation in smaller planning organizations, can you please tell me how do you view the reliance on the professional staff that are employed by the state to run these organizations as well? And then when you think about maybe the sub-councils that would be underneath a major planning organization like DRCOG, what would you think would be the best way to address that if you were doing it in Denver? If you had parks and trails, if you had wastewater, if you had those other things, what would you want to see so that you could be effective in that work? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I hope I'm understanding your question is how you might broaden the engagement under a similar model of DRCOG on these other particular topics. And DRCOG does deal with issues around aging and growth in the region, and of course programs for persons with disabilities in the region as well. And so I think they've done a kind of effective job and create these kind of subdivisions. And as you mentioned, you call them sub-councils, and maybe that's the same kind of interchangeable structure that we're talking about here to address those key issues of the region, particularly growth, obviously. And that calls on for maybe other people from the city of Denver or other cities to be engaged. But those sub-councils tend to work because they drive the agendas to the larger body for consideration and engagement. So my recommendation would be to, if it's not the dominant issue, that the sub-council model would be probably the best in which I would drive, and maybe engage other experts from the cities that are sitting at the table as well.
Thank you, Chair Cleaverhorn. Do you have a follow-up?
I wanted to say, please don't steal any of our businesses as you are competing with us.
Good point. Our last comment or question from Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much, Mayor, for meeting with us. So I have a question that I think connects with other questions that were asked, and in fact, I think steals a page from a question that was asked of this previous presenter. Could you riff a little bit on who you think the constituents are of the group, especially in a context, I'm an elected official, so it's very linear for me. Like, I know who I answer to. And I'm wondering who this group feels that they answer to. How does a member of the public feel that they have leverage over what's happening or decisions that are being made, et cetera? I think that one of the challenges for the Met Council is that they're essentially treated like a state agency, and so that gives them, they're sort of enmeshed in the web, let's say, of state politics, but really their focus is the metro, and so that can be really complicating for fulfilling their mission and a challenge, I think, for anybody at the organization. So would just love to hear you talk about constituencies and how accountability is felt, and both by members and then also members of the public or others who have expectations of metropolitan governance.
Yeah, that is a great question. I believe that, I've never been asked this question, but to think about it in terms of really the structure and the setup, that the participating governments, the counties and the cities that are sitting at the table are probably the constituents of the body. We bring our collective, our individual values and plans to the table. And so we represent, to your point, our constituencies, there's no question there. We represent the people. And we're representative of those people, but also of the governing bodies that are implementing plans that the people have endorsed at the table. So I think in terms of the council itself, it's the governments, the city of Denver, the other cities that are there, and we in turn are representing the constituencies. In terms of community outreach and engagement, they do hold public hearings around their plans and decision-making that they're about to have, particularly what involves the allocation of limited federal funds or state funds that we have to be real smart about. And so they act similar to what I think some city councils around the region act in terms of holding public hearings to help guide them in some of their decision-making. Does that answer your question?
Commissioner?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll have one last question from Representative Cosden.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I didn't get my hand up there.
It's totally fine.
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us and sharing some of your thoughts. And I was at a national seminar not too long ago, and they talked about an initiative that Denver had, and I was trying to find it on the internet here, if it was through the city or more of a regional or some kind of a think tank. But you know, with the large growth that you'd mentioned that Denver has, it brings economic opportunity, and you've had an incredible amount of economic expansion. And that redevelopment can exacerbate gentrification, and which is an issue that I think we all struggle with. Denver probably more pronounced nationally, but you know, increased cost of living and rents, and certain pockets of poverty that we've had. I think one of the failures of our regional planning has been concentrations of poverty and some of those housing issues. Can you share your thoughts on how your COG model has addressed this gentrification and kind of tried to minimize that displacement, especially among minority people of color communities? I think in Denver, it's specifically higher concentrations of the Latinos have been displaced and the affordable rents and housing. Hopefully you're familiar with the institute or study that I can't remember exactly right now, but can you talk about that a little bit? And has the COG model helped address and keep an eye on this redevelopment and the gentrification issue in Denver?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Commissioner, and I love all your questions, by the way. This is obviously a very smart and aware group of people working for the region there, and I appreciate, because your comments are right on track, I think, with regards to not only explosion in growth and investment, but we've also seen explosion, or at least the other side of the equation, where things are become more challenging in housing and homelessness, and to your point, involuntary displacement and gentrification. And the way Dr. Cog has moved to address this, as well as many of us around the city, is to infuse the value of inclusion, as Mayor Hales talked about inclusion, equity into their modeling, and to make sure that, and as we plan, those are the guiding values for us going forward. So as a result, Dr. Cog and other cities like Denver have talked a lot about density, particularly around transit corridors, where we're making the investments, how do we help drive down the cost of housing as well as transportation by building quality housing and density around transit corridors going forward. And the state has leaned in as well. And so I think everyone is pretty much on the same page, and Dr. is playing a key component in guiding and monitoring and making sure that is occurring. So I think those are the two major steps that they've taken in order to address the issues of poverty, equity, inclusion, housing challenges and pressures on housing, and minimizing the driving costs of transportation that only compounds the cost of living in the region if you don't address it at the same time.
Thanks, Representative Koznick. A very good question. And we're going to end with Mayor Hovland. Mayor Hancock, I really wanted to thank you. And this has been really one of really good conversations, one of our best, I think, so far. And I appreciate the engagement of the task force and sort of tees up our next agenda item quite well. But before we do that, Again, Mayor Hovland, thank you for bringing these great mayors to us. I think their perspective as mayors is very, very helpful. Again, appreciate your work in getting them here. So either a question, comment, or concluding thought from Mayor Hovland.
Of course, to thank Mayor Hancock and former Mayor Hales. Still feels like Michael Hancock's the mayor to me because we've worked together for the past several years. So closely. I thought that one thing that with all these legislators gathered that are key legislative leaders in our state, as well as professors and county commissioners from our metropolitan area that work for, the most significant portion of our population. Michael, you might talk a little bit about this equity center that you're building. I think that they would find it quite fascinating as we talk about this topic of equity. It's a little bit off topic from what we're talking about here, but I think important for our county commissioners and legislators to hear because it might be something that we want to think about replicating here in Minnesota. I think it was a fantastic idea. So please share that quick thought with us.
So this will be our last question, and then we'll move on. Thank you so much, Mayor Hovland. And yes, I think that's directed to Mayor Hancock, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, real briefly, Mayor Hovland, thank you very much. And again, good to see you. And keep going. I will say to this, one is we started with the creation of the Office of Equity Innovation in the city of Denver. Equity, Innovation, and Inclusion in the city of Denver. It's the Mayor's Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Innovation. Equity, Innovation, and Inclusion, I apologize. And the goal was to make sure that in everything that we do, the question of equity is asked. And quite frankly, policy decisions that we make, we have to ask the question, how does it impact the people in our city across the board? It's always a hard thing to do, but we must have consideration because oftentimes policy is made without consideration of how it's impacting people across the social, cultural, and economic spectrum. And as a result, when we, for example, addressed the issue of COVID and we needed to open up centers around the city of Denver to bring people, our unhoused residents off the streets into safe locations that had good spacing, we were going to use our rec centers. Well, it was the office of the Mayor's Office of Equity, Inclusion, Innovation and Inclusion that stepped in and said, wait a minute, you can't just choose any rec center. It must meet certain standards, particularly with people with disabilities and so on and so forth. And like any city, some of our cities meet that standard. Our rec centers meet that standard. Some don't because they're older. And it was them that pretty much saved the day in terms of making sure we only use rec centers that were accessible and don't move with urgency if you're going to exclude people because it doesn't have the ability for people to get in there. And so that office was helpful. As a result of COVID and the social unrest that occurred, some good friends and I sat down and talked about the fact that in our nation, whenever we've had some racial unrest, we typically cover the real pain with policies and legislation. We never really address the real challenge. And so we dreamt up this concept, creating this the Denver Institute of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Reconciliation that will train and create training programs, but also forum where we can bring people together who maybe are on different sides of the issue. An example today would be, we're already talking about how we bring someone from Israel or the Jewish community and the Hamas community together, Palestinian community together, sit at a table and let's talk about why people are challenged right now with this issue. And we can do the same thing with public policy. Why would Group X be offended or disappointed or challenged by this policy we're passing, and create that safe space, a neutral place for people to talk about that and then back it up with research. So we have a partnership with the University of the Metropolitan State University and using their pool of academic and intellectual capital to help guide the research. But we have practitioners in equity and race relations and social work efforts to kind of back up and create programming around that as well. And so we're building it right now as we speak, and I'm excited about some of the things we're going to be doing.
Well, thank you. I think, Mayor, that is a good, sounds like a really innovative and forward-looking and very relevant and timely effort that you're involved with. Chair Cleveland?
Thank you, Chair Hornstein. I would just like to ask, in this Equity, Innovation, and Inclusion Center, since Dr. Cog also deals with aging and accessibility, is that Inclusion Center also looking to embed policies around aging as well as racial inequities?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about equity, you're talking about whatever the subtopic area might be, you know. Aging could be one of them. Persons with disabilities,
Perfect.
It's not just based on race. It's
Perfect.
based
I just wanted to make sure I had that fuller, fuller view. Thank you.
Yeah, and Chair Cleveland, in addition to chairing our state government committee in the House, is also very active in aging. So thank you for that. Well, mayors, thank you, and we appreciate your time and your insights, and I think you've helped us along here, and with a good transition to our next item here on our agenda. So thank you, and thank you again, Mayor Hovland, for bringing these distinguished guests to us.
Good luck.
Thank you. So what we'd like to do here is, you'll recall last month we started a conversation just within the task force about vision and goals, and we didn't finish it. And I think it's really important that we continue that conversation. So that's really what our task is for the next 55 minutes or so. I understand we don't really have a public, anyone signed up from the public. If there is someone, we'll accommodate them. But we really do have just almost a whole hour now to sort this out. So I'm going to quote Commissioner Green, I'm going to riff a little on sort of where we're at right now, and sort of the other popular word now that everyone seems to always say is level setting. I think that, one of the things that I think has become clear as we've had these conversations is that, everyone around this table have diverse views about the Met Council and its various facets and potential reform ideas. I would say despite our diversity of views about that, whether you support electing the Met Council, a council of governments, staggered terms, home rule charter, keeping it the way it is. We've had an idea from a member of the public here who's here about a combination of appointed and elected officials, whatever that is, wherever you're leaning, wherever you're going here. I think there is some agreement that there is a credibility issue with the Met Council. Again, whether it's real, whether it's perceived, I think that is one of the reasons why we're here. And so, I think that I had a very good conversation with Ms. Paddock on Friday, and I just wanted to, and she put forward, I think, some ideas and that she had gotten, I think, from other experts, about ways in which we can proceed in terms of looking at problem solving. And again, we want to, there is an issue to solve. There is a problem to solve here. And so this rubric, which is very interesting that I just want to put forward here, involves, defining the problem, then secondly, analyzing the problem, generating a solution analysis, then we would select the solution, and then come up with next steps. So I think that's an interesting framework for us to think about. And again, if we were to define the problem, I would say that, there is, again, in my perception, and I think what I've heard from many members here, is that there is a trust issue in the public with the Met Council. And so, again, I would also acknowledge, just as we have different views about what a possible solution is, I want to acknowledge that we have different views about why that is, why there may be a credibility issue. And I think, but I want to at least come to some consensus that that is one of the problems that we're dealing with. And so we've addressed some problem-solving protocols here. We've reviewed what the Met Council does. We've reviewed its planning and operations responsibilities. We've spent quite a bit of time on that. And in so looking at that, we've looked at areas where the public is also unhappy with the Met Council's work. And we've also looked at areas in which people have, been supportive of that work. So we've started on generating some solutions by reviewing governance models in other places. I've talked already about a few of those. And again, we've had legislation. I also want to acknowledge, we've had either in the last biennium or previous to that, we've had legislation championed by Senator Pratt and others around a council of governments. We've had an elected Met Council legislation before us. We've had Representative Kosnick's ideas before us. We've had Senator Dibble's ideas around home rule charter before us. And so, there have been a lot of, so there's no shortage of ideas and proposals that the legislature, has already looked at. But, I want to start us on the path to sort of some solution analysis. And so I want to, start off also as we frame our discussion today, and this came up in some questions that Chair Cleavorn and others were asking, even today of our guests from Denver and Portland. Who ultimately is the constituency? Who is the Met Council accountable to? And so, I think that as Chair Cleavorn has pointed out, obviously, there's accountability to the legislature. As I've often said, the legislature created the Met Council. If there's an issue with it, then it's up to us to fix it. But it is the legislature ultimately that grants the Met Council its planning and operating powers. And so, I wanted to point out that, as we start this conversation, the questions of credibility and accountability, can be viewed, I think, in the frame of governance. So just to throw out a few questions, how can the Met Council be directly accountable to the citizens it serves? Again, we're looking conversations about its constituency. Should the Met Council, obviously we had this discussion today, and this will be the last thing I say before I kind of open things up. We had good discussion today about who the ultimate constituencies are of regional government. And so it's my perspective is it's a combination, it's the public at large. I would start with that, but we have really interested parties among local governments. We have really interested parties in terms of people that are, directly impacted by the council's actions. And so, with that, I just wanted to, start us off, Chair Cleavorn, with your thoughts, and then I would just ask the members to respond to these general framing thoughts. Chair Cleavorn.
So one of the pieces and just listening to you, and I'm just trying to frame this for the conversation we're about to have. So we are talking about what are the possibilities for governance, but I'm not hearing how we are going to test those possibilities, under what matrix. I mean, you can make a suggestion with one matrix, but then to this effectiveness plane that we're talking about today, how do we stress test that potential piece? Because right now we're talking about apples and oranges, right? Nothing we have heard is as unique as our Met Council. So I want to make sure that if we decide as a task force, and to me that's a really big if we decide to make changes, what would that look like, and how would we, before we I want to avoid the unintended consequence. I don't want us to set up the Met Council to fail either. So how do we stress test that?
I think that's a good question, and I think it really does bear underlining that when we look at some of these other models, particularly from other regions, and I think this was very clear when we talked about both Portland and Denver, that, no region is the same. And every region has different challenges, and whether it's geography or the economy, these governance models have different jurisdictions, right? The Met Council doesn't have aging, right? I haven't heard any proposal that that it be, included. Portland manages its zoo through the Metropolitan government, and I've not heard any proposals around that. And so, I think it is really important if we want to look at this through the lens of a matrix, Chair. And, I think that's a really good idea. And so then, what are the elements of that matrix? Yes, you didn't raise your hand, Professor, but you looked anxious to respond. So I'm going to call on you and then.
That's always my problem.
And Ms. Paddock. I'll call on you and then Ms. Paddock next.
I think, what I was going to say, I think I was interested in saying is that Met Council had aging for a while in the day, I think. It doesn't have it anymore.
Who knew?
Yeah. Yeah, they aged out. Yeah, it's all people like me, all of us. But I was thinking that this constituency issue is, if it's an agency, it's really responsible to the governor and the legislature. And it feels kind of like an agency to me, even though the council said it isn't an agency. The attorney general said it can't be an agency, and the council agreed with that. But it feels like an agency, in the sense that it's really the legislature, and the people don't have much role in it at all. Now, when you decide something is an agency, that's perfectly fine. That's the way it ought to be. But when you say something is a government in America, which means it's got discretion and taxing power, the law is pretty clear. That governments are responsible to the people. When we create governments in the United States, there's exceptions, but by and large, the people are the constituents, and they are sovereign in our country. The people are sovereign in governments. That's a principle of our revolution. We can't create derivative governments. Like the founders said that. So, that's a part of it. If we think it's an agency, it's just fine the way it is. But if we think it's a government, it has discretion and makes important decisions. Our traditions are very clear. It's responsible to the people.
Good. Ms. Paddock.
Following along with that.
And I want to pick up on what Commissioner Green said a while ago. She used the phrase enmeshed with the state agenda, that the Met Council is enmeshed with the governor's agenda. And from the standpoint of credibility, I wonder if that is a basic problem. Does the fact that the Met Council agenda is legally enmeshed with the governor's agenda, does that undermine its credibility as a metropolitan serving agency? And is that a basic problem? I think it is. I don't know if others around this table would agree with that, but Mr. Chair, you said there is a credibility issue. I think that's undeniable. And then you went on to ask, why is there a credibility issue? And I would suggest that that's the reason why.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We have Senator Dibble and then Chair Cleavorn. Chair Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion. I'll be hopefully pretty brief, and I appreciated Professor Orfield's framing up in terms of agency versus government. And I think as we consider the problems that we're trying to solve, it might be useful to hold both of those ideas in our heads, because as I express my frustrations of things with the Met Council, the things that they don't do, or things that they do and don't do well, or get wrong. it helps for me to distinguish between those two ideas or those two models of what we're talking about. So, for example, when we're talking about some of the direct service delivery items that I feel like the Met Council either just simply doesn't do well, or could do better if they were more available and open to external input and or the direction of the appointed leadership. Hang on one sec. I've got I'll be right back. My microwave. I just warmed up some coffee and it's beeping. It's going to continue.
That's sort of a peak, that reminds me of a peak COVID moment. We'll wait for you, but I just wanted to let people know the list. That was great, by the way. We have Chair Cleavorn, Representative Weens, and Mr. Rockwell lined up next. And as we wait for...
My comment's very short.
Okay, yeah, well, that's fine. You're on deck. I just wanted to let you know. And then we'll have...
All right, I'll just finish real quick here. What I articulate from time to time, and it gets to Mary Paddock's comments, and that is, is the Met Council a subset of, the governor's cabinet and, as such an agency, or, is it really, should it really be situated so that it is really robustly trying to move the vision and the interests and the needs of the metropolitan area forward? Some would say those are the same thing. I would argue that no matter how amazing the governor is, every governor has 24 different cabinet level agencies that they have responsibility for, and as such is sorting through all those competing priorities. And functionally, the Met Council is obligated to operate largely out of view in terms of establishing its upcoming legislative policy priorities and its proposed budget until the day of the great unveiling of the governor's budget. So it's really hard for what would be a regional government that really should be maybe perhaps tasked with with the responsibility of moving a great vision forward on behalf of the region, and being able to really robustly advocate for that vision and everything that goes with that, pulling the region together around that vision, developing that vision in consultation and collaboration with stakeholder input, holding budget hearings, adopting a budget, advancing a larger policy agenda vis-a-vis the legislature and the governor. When it's one of 24 and has to do that largely out of view and in a vacuum, as all agencies do. We don't know, as legislators and the public, we don't know what the governor is going to propose until the governor presents his budget, someday in February. So from that perspective, I think we need to think about the Met Council as a government and what the best governance model is for that. Switching modes, the Met Council is an agency that plans for and delivers some fairly tangible services that touch our lives every single day, and transit, et cetera, et cetera. And it falters. It doesn't do those things well. I have an example. Just a few weeks ago, the city of Minneapolis called us, and they were very upset because the Met Council had purchased a prime property on the corner of a major commercial corridor, which the city has planned for a lot of corridor investments to really bring back the community and economic vitality of that corridor. And they're going to put a lift station right on that prime corner, completely obliterating the ability for a really positive outcome in that intersection and negatively affecting and impacting that corridor. This was a conversation that had been going on with Met Council bureaucracy for 2 years, and they were completely impervious to the objections of the city of Minneapolis in been citing a really ugly piece of public infrastructure in that prime spot. And so as an agency, its ability to respond to and be transparent and react and work effectively with local partners in the delivery of essential services fails. So even as an agency, there needs to be some, and no Met Council member was aware, the chair wasn't aware, they had to call their elected legislators, who then had to call in the leadership, who was then made aware, and then a productive conversation could ensue. But as a matter of course, this was just going to happen. So even as an agency, something different needs to happen. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and I know that you have other examples too, Senator Dibble, but that was a good one. Chair Cleavorn.
Thank you. I actually just kind of lost my thought for just a moment, but it was the question, I think, so when we talk about whose agenda the Met Council is to bring forward, right? I think we've heard testimony, and I was trying to find the exact words that were presented to us in testimony, but I don't have them in front of me. I believe that the Met Council did not describe themselves as an agency. So I'll just kind of make that statement. And then the agenda of the chief elected official of the state, right? Is that not, and maybe this is not a question we answer here, but whether I agree with it or disagree with it, depending on who the governor may be, isn't the governor's agenda the agenda that the majority of the people of the state of Minnesota have elected to be in place? And I mean, we've had governors I absolutely did not agree with. So it's not a matter of this governor, it is the governor, right? So how do we balance that, as this is what the majority of the people of Minnesota are asking for, and not saying that it is the person who sits in the office, right? So I just want to make sure that when we're looking at that, I mean, that's the person, that's the office holder that the majority of the people of Minnesota have requested. That's how it is.
Thank you, Chair Cleavorn. And again, I think that does speak to a number of the issues that we've been grappling with. And, ultimately, that's on the table. That's on the table. Representative Wiens, Mr. Rockwell, and we'll go back to Professor Orfield after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to riff on the process.
Riff is the word, Commissioner.
It's the day. I heard Riz was the new word of the day, but maybe not appropriate for this kind. Maybe that's going to be one of our criteria. But I'd like to be just wonky just a little bit, because I think, we've gained a lot of information over a period of time, and we need to kind of touch base with what the process is. And what Ms. Paddock brought up, I think, is a very workable, linear, logical process. We may need to go back and revisit something if we didn't quite answer it right. But I think that first step, once we adopt the process, is what are we solving for? What is the problem set? What do we want the creature to do? And then from there, we can go into developing the solution sets. But I think we have a distinct opportunity here. Now we're entering that phase of public engagements to really develop the criteria by which we're going to judge all these solution sets. And I think you are very right, Chair Cleavorn. The most difficult thing that we will do is how do we stress test the solution set that we think is the best? In my parlance, it's war game. And what you want to do is you want to get as many of the operating systems working together and find where those things don't work, so that you can adjust it before you go on to decide to do it or deploy it. But I think we're at that opportunity set to develop all of those things. And I think it's doable. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Wiens. And I had a nice lunch with Representative Wiens, towards the beginning of the process. And, he's kind of a systems thinker. So appreciate your perspective on that. So we're going to hear from Mr. Rockwell, Professor Orfield, and then Representative Koznick after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So staying a little bit with the theme that's been brought up from a few others, and thinking about what is it that we want the Met Council to do, I had kind of a series of follow-up questions for us to consider. Instead of just throwing more questions out on the table, I'll also give my take on where I stand on those questions.
However you want to.
Just to move the process along in the interest of efficiency. One of the things I want the Met Council to have. So I heard Senator Dibble say, is this an entity accountable to the governor, or is it moving the regional vision forward? And I think, and heard that preference for moving the regional vision forward. And I want to kind of refine that idea of regional vision too, and ask, when we say we want the Met Council to move the regional vision forward, I think we can interpret that in different ways. I think we've heard from some of the folks who have testified before this committee that, moving the region forward in their instance means kind of being a coordinator, right? Moving the collection of visions of sub-jurisdictions forward and making sure that they're kind of working together well. So it's a forum to have coordination. And we've also heard moving a regional vision forward means moving a vision for the region forward, which is different, right? There's a collection of individual visions or a regional, and maybe it's a combination, right? But I think there's, though the answer to that question carries a lot of weight in terms of what the power of a council is, right? Do we want it to have some real autonomy? Do we want, in the land use planning approval process, to ensure kind of consistency between comprehensive plans of neighboring jurisdictions, or do we want it to act more like the Clean Water Act works? The federal government says you've got to create, state plans here, and if you don't create a state, and the EPA approves it, and if you don't, the EPA is going to write it for you, right? I mean, that is very different, and both relate to those kind of local plans. So, in terms of somebody who thinks a lot about kind of the bigger cross-jurisdictional systems, I would be interested in thinking about how do we allow the Met Council to really not just create a regional plan, but move a regional plan forward. I think, we've heard also a lot, and Chair Cleveland brought this up just a couple of minutes ago, there are different jurisdictional responsibilities for a lot of these regional governments. Do we want the jurisdictional responsibilities to remain the same? We've heard from folks here that the Met Council does very well on some things, right? They do very well on water. They do, well on some of these other regional parks. So, do we, in order to not sort of poke the bear of something that's working, do we separate out land use and transportation? Do we think about, breaking it up into different entities so that we have some of these things dealt with? Maybe it's important for sewers to have that coordination, but it's important for transit to have our regional vision and move that regional vision forward. Maybe those demand different governance structures. Okay. And then, and I guess to stay consistent with what I said at the beginning, I think what I'm unclear on where I stand on that, although I do think that land use and transportation really go together and should be planned and executed together. And then I think there's this question that we're probably all on the same page on, do we want the Met Council to be kind of more like staff-led, or do we want to have, we heard, who do you go to? How do you get the Met Council to do things? That then is really about how we provide enough authority to the board members so that when we ask them to do something and they don't do it, we know that they have the opportunity to do it. I think right now, if you ask a board member, Met Council board member, this is a problem in my district, this is what I'm hearing, and they kind of go like, well, I'm working part-time here, I don't really have any power, this is a super staff-led organization, they wouldn't say that to you probably, but do they actually have the authority to move something forward, right? And if we want them to, then we need to think about those internal structures, which may or may not relate, like that's not necessarily related to how they get into those seats, but how they are able to function within the organization once they hold the seats. Do they have staff members, which all the elected officials around this table do? You have LAs, you know.
Some more than others.
Some more than others, right? Some more than others. But all of you have somebody, right? Or a pool, right? And so, you know, thinking about that, think about the pay level, you know, we heard about that from Portland. And so a few other things to consider there, really, and like, how do we want this to function? And then making sure we're kind of reverse engineering from that point.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to hear from Professor Orfield next, then Representative Koznick and Commissioner Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, one of the issues is continuity. I think, you know, you have governors in my lifetime that didn't really think at all about these issues. Governor Perpich was a very good guy, you know, wonderful person, but this was not on the top of his agenda when he ran for governor. And there were some bad consequences. I mean, he put his personal banker in charge of the Met Council, he got in trouble, blah, blah, blah. He just wasn't very focused on this. You know, and what percentage of the governor's attention is focused on this in a campaign? I mean, it feels like a governor has a million issues to run on, and it's hard. This is fairly intricate stuff, you know. You know, this is plenty to keep an administrator or an elected official quite busy with this. But the governor's got to think about all the state. He's got to think about tax policy. He's got to think about the environment. He's got to think about jobs. He's got to think. I mean, this is going to be a very tiny part of most governors' thinking process when they, you know, in my lifetime, in my exception, I have known all these governors, Republican and Democrat, and very few, this was a very important issue to them. And they were all good governors. The second thing, I mean, I think if you were to think about it, if it were elected, and I know that's one option of many, but it would be more like the county boards. There would be some continuity over time. And people on those county boards would gain experience over time and learn their jobs. You know, it takes a while. I mean, when I was here, you know, it took me a while to figure out what the heck was going on. You know, it was a big, complicated place, and I had a pretty good education, but it took me a while to figure out what was going on. And you know, and you get to be a chair, you learn something more. Over time, you learn how that works. We've never allowed the Met Council to do that. We've got a governor that, you know, the governor will put, you have governors that disagree on all these issues. So they'll put a totally different council in. So the council tries to do well, and the new governor will say, everything you just did was wrong. And that happens with Democrats and Republicans. He said, everything you've been doing for 4 years is wrong. I want to do an entirely different thing now. What happens to the staff? Well, they just get whiplashed back and forth. You know, if they have to turn 180 degrees every 4 years, nobody's going to stand up and try to think about things very deeply. None of the members are going to gain any experience. I mean, I think the legislature was imperfect. I was here for 12 years. This is an imperfect place, but people used their power. They learned about the body. They gained experience over time. You know, they learned how the place worked. You know, you don't learn your first term how this place works. And the same thing is in a county board. So, I mean, I think what would it be like if it were elected? It would be like Scott County. It would be like Hennepin County. You'd have kind of a growth of wisdom over the years, a growth of experience, people that knew what the issues were. They wouldn't all be first termers. They wouldn't all get thrown out. It would be unlikely that you'd elect a new county board that would completely change your agenda that you just worked 4 years on. They'd probably maybe move it this way or that way. They'd probably say, we're going to move a little bit this way, we're going to move a little bit that way, but they wouldn't throw the whole thing out. So I've been a critic of the Met Council a lot, but partly I feel sorry for these staff people because they just get whiplashed back and forth. And the people, what kind of behavior is rewarded by that? Is just keeping your head down. Just keeping your head down and, you know, maybe asserting your power sometimes, maybe not. But you know that you could get somebody that'll, you know, anything you've worked on that you take any pride in, you may have somebody that they made a board entirely different that says everything you've done is rotten, you know, and you got to start all over again. We're going to throw this is a planning document for 20 years. Well, it lasts 4 years. So, I mean, I think in that sense, I mean, I don't think elected is a panacea. I don't think it's a panacea for the legislature. The legislature is a dysfunctional place. It was when I was there. It is now.
No.
I think that I think Churchill was right. It was the least terrible form of government.
Well, there's a sound bite. Thank you, Professor. I've got Representative Cosner, Commissioner Green, and Senator Pratt.
Thank you, and for the board members, I'll forward to you the, I keep referring to the gentrification thing. In Denver, it's called NEST, Neighborhood Economic Development Stabilization something. So some kind of interesting things that I think some members of the task force specifically would be interested in, the revitalization and the issues surrounding some of the housing things. Mr. Chair, what I've kind of enveloped over the time would be that I think we want to be very cautious if we need to have a Met Council be reauthorized, potentially bringing in our neighbors to the east in Hudson and that. I think that would be probably pretty detrimental to the ongoing part of the vision that we have here. So that's one thing. Talked a little bit, Professor Orfield, his comments here, I think, lend to one of the things that some of us have had conversations about is that the Met Council serves at the pleasure, the legal term, at the pleasure of the governor. I think if we continue to riff on this conversation about who the constituencies are, I'm of the camp that think it's the cities, the counties, the mayors, and the councils, the commissioners. If we strengthen the nomination process and put almost all the power with that constituency to nominate who serves on the council, and we can have a further discussion as if maybe it would be council members and county commissioners, or more to the true COG model that they would serve. I wouldn't be opposed to either, but certainly the nomination process could be strengthened as something that I'm seeing as a theme. And then also breaking up some of the tasks that we as a legislature, either you and I or people before us, have continued to empower the current Met Council to take on a lot of these other things that maybe now we see as cause trouble for transparency and efficiency of services and that, and maybe breaking up the transit portion as something that I think has a strong appeal. And then, of course, the easy low-hanging fruit is the staggered terms. And then, Mr. Chair, I don't know that we've had the Met Council kind of present a kind of what they do on some of the programs and such, and their legal team is here, but I don't know that we've really had an opportunity to hear from them how they envision some of these problems and accusations, for lack of a better word. What are they doing internally to be more efficient and accountable? And I don't know that we've heard that. And certainly also, in my opinion, as a legislator, I think it does act a lot like an agency, regardless of what the legal ramifications or definitions are. They serve at the pleasure of the governor, appointed by the governor. Somebody disagrees with the governor, they can be yanked, or the thumb comes down on them, and it's very staff driven, and to serve at the direction of the administration. And so I'd be curious what the current governor's office, how they feel about this, because ultimately, if we need to pass some new form or model, we would need the support, or where are the things that we do agree with. I know that there's a governor's appointment on this task force, but I would be curious to get a little bit stronger guidance from the current administration on what's possible, or where they're at on that as well. So those are kind of the couple things that I think I see the task force kind of moving towards a little bit of consensus, but certainly some things that we should avoid. Thank you.
Points well taken. I was thinking about what our colleague Representative Davids always reminds us, 68-34-1. And I think that is something to consider. I have just a question, Representative Koznick, a point of clarification, and I think, you have put forward, I think, an intriguing idea. It's sort of kind of staggered terms plus, or, I guess for a lack of a better description. But in your formulation, and again, we're not really getting to solutions yet, but since you referenced it, in your formulation, do you think that with this enhanced appointment process or nominating process, do you envision then that these appointees would then be accountable to the local people who nominated them instead of the governor? Is that just a point of clarification?
Yeah, and the bill that I introduced wasn't fully comprehensive and doesn't include that. I personally think that I would prefer.
We talked about that.
I would prefer taking nearly complete control away from the administration.
Yeah. Okay.
And having it, the individual counties and cities would appoint a person if we don't go to a direct COG model.
Yeah,
which I probably prefer more.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure people understood your new idea here.
Yep.
Okay, we have Commissioner Green and then Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I've scratched down a few notes here that I'm going to refer to because there's a lot to think about. One thing I wanted to say up front is that change is scary. And I think something that was a learning for me in this process is how we got to the current setup and how it felt a little bit by accident of circumstance and not even necessarily that thoroughly thought out. There was not a Metro Governance Task Force when the sort of biggest, most recent changes happened. But it did come out of a time of dissatisfaction, and that's, of course, what enabled it to pass the legislature, and that's what's brought us here today, is a sort of shared belief. I think our chair references, but a shared belief that we're dissatisfied with what's happening now and how it's serving the state and the region and want to make change. Of course, what that change is a gigantic question, but dwelling for a moment in the fact that we are brought together by some frustration and that it feels like a peak, a moment of inflection, I think is important. I also, very much connected to that, want to think about how as our chair has said a number of times, ultimately the current Met Council is a creature of the legislature. Whatever we decide will also ultimately be a creature of the legislature.
Correct.
Something that we at Hennepin County remind ourselves of all the time is that we're a creature of the legislature. It's legislation that creates counties. And so it's not as if the legislature is, or we are debating, like, should we, remove the legislature and suddenly it feels sort of freewheeling and who does it answer to or whatnot. Things will still ultimately be responsible to the legislature. In that vein, I also want to sort of say something maybe a little bit in defense of current and former governors, which is that governors sign what arrives on their desk. And so in that way, the Met Council has always been a creature of the legislature as well as the governor. The legislature has got to support and advance whatever it is that the governor might want to do to change or whatnot. And I want to second something that you said, Representative Koznick, which is whatever is true by law and whatnot, the sense is that the Met Council is a state agency. For good and for evil, that's just how it feels. I wonder if I was the only person in this room, and I sort of doubt it, who heard the mayor of Denver. And we think of Denver, we as Minnesotans think of Denver as a competitive region for the Twin Cities. But do they think of the Twin Cities as competitive with them? In 1994, they authorized the building out of their transit system, and they have been growing like gangbusters since then. That's not true for us. And that is growth and economic development and attraction of businesses that we've missed out on. And when I heard that, I just had this pang of oh gosh, let us collectively think about that and get this right and be as ambitious as our biggest visions allow us to be, because that's just, wow, ouch. So I want to come a little bit back to something that I think you teed up, Mr. Chair, at the beginning of this conversation, which is, and I think you talked about it with Ms. Paddock, this sort of what are the stages of our work? And this first part is defining the problem. And I think we are still in that stage. I know when we talked about this sort of at the end of one of our meetings previously, there was almost like a dry erase board up on the screen, and we were adding things. I think we're still at this stage of defining what the problem is. various of us have talked about, one of the challenges is what is the regional vision? What do we want to even ask ourselves as what is our regional vision? So it's not just, hey, the 15 of us are going to decide on the regional vision, but who do we want to ask the question of what is our regional vision? And real risks versus, I also, another question on the table is this issue of the MPO and the reauthorization of the MPO at the federal level. That's come up a couple times. It's not something that I think we know a lot about. What are the real risks there? I will say one thing I do know is that the Met Council is extremely unusual as an MPO. We've been sort of grandfathered in at the federal level, so I actually think there's some risk to staying how we are. But let's talk about that. I don't want to sort of counter my fear or your fear with my fear. Like, let's figure out what the truth is on that. And then lastly, I'd want to just close with my own history on this issue, which is that, as you probably all know, I've testified at the legislature in support of Senator Dibble's bill for an elected Met Council. I feel everything that has been said about how government is a democracy in the United States, and our founding forefathers and mothers have led us in that direction. But I will tell you that what put me there, what put Hennepin County at that table was a desire for change. And so while I come with maybe some baggage and revelation of what I think, I hope you'll also really take it with we are here, I am motivated, I think we're all motivated for change, and I'm interested in talking about ideas. If it's not elected, I'm a student of Representative Koznick's bill, like what can we do? And I like the process, Chair Hornstein, that you outlined that puts us on a path. We've learned so much. Now let's ask ourselves, what are the solutions what are problems are we looking to solve? And then let's move forward on a design that leads us there.
Thanks so much, Commissioner Green, for those comments. I'm going to give the last comment. First of all, before I call on Senator Pratt, in terms of time management for the remainder of this committee meeting, I wanted to see if there was anyone here in the room, in the public, that wanted to address us. Raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anyone, so I'm going to give Senator Pratt the last word, and then I'll conclude with sort of a little preview of our next meeting. Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I've been jotting things down. Now I can't even read my own writing, but as we've gone along, and I appreciate the comments of everyone here at the table, because I think I can agree and I can somewhat disagree with almost everyone, including Kaz, along the way. But something Representative Cleavorn said is with the governor being the elected official of the state and making the appointments to the Metropolitan Council, it leads to two problems in my mind. One, what Professor Orfield talked about, and that's continuity. Now, that could easily be addressed somewhat with staggered terms, but that's another quick fix. And as I've talked to people who have made changes to the Met Council along the way, adding responsibilities, it was, we didn't know what else to do with it, so we put it in the Met Council. And there it sat for 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is. Hoping that we can be more thoughtful, but Mr. Rockwell, what you touched on and kind of going back to the question that Professor Orfield asked, should a Metropolitan Council be elected or appointed? Well, that was a binary choice, and we shouldn't be constrained by that, whether or should they be locally elected officials. We shouldn't be constrained to 16 districts. We can maybe come to an agreement that 58 is too many. But I think the value, and Mr. Chair, I think one of the problems we're trying to solve, and it really touched when the Denver mayor was talking, was around that idea of collaboration. When Mayor Hales was talking, he talked that sometimes Metro could be threatening to local communities. I don't know that that's what we want to set up. And I want to be very cautious about the unintended consequences of what we set up here going forward, because I don't know that our predecessors were always cognizant of those unintended consequences, because they weren't always intended to be permanent fixes. They were just supposed to be, we didn't know what else to do with it, we'll fix it later type of thing. And so who should, and I think Representative Cleavorn touched on it, the constituencies, right? Who should be developing the regional vision? And in my mind, it should be, and this process has somewhat solidified that the main core constituencies are the counties, municipalities, and townships. And really, what we should be doing is aggregating the visions of those local communities. And I talked a little bit about scale, and our county administrator talked a little bit about last week. Not only the idea that we come together and solve problems, but we develop those relationships before problems arise. It's been very helpful when we talk about economic development. We have what's called the one-stop shop. They have a listing of every commercial property in the county. And depending on what a business is looking for, they can tell them the pros and the cons of each. You know, where Representative Kosnick represents on, you know, County Road 2 and Highway 35, there's a desire for development, but it doesn't have the infrastructure ready to go yet. Where in a different part of the county, maybe there's a smaller plot of land, but it's got the infrastructure they need, and we can, you know, the businesses can work through that. But they're not going to each individual municipality. We've got that coordinated, and it's not and it's being coordinated locally through partnerships and collaboration. And I've got two very good Met Council reps. Let me just state that. I have a good relationship with both. But what we're hearing as a body is that we're not getting that collaboration. And I think, Mr. Chair, that's one of the problems we have to solve, is that I think we listed it as a value. Now we have to solve for that problem. How do we create a body that is, by its very nature, by its very structure, collaborative? I've got other notes here that I'm gonna skip over, but I just really want to make sure that as we talk about scope of Met Council, as we talk about makeup of Met Council, we kind of break through the paradigms that we already have, and we're open to, you know, new ideas. Right now, a Met Council rep represents about 2.5 Senate districts. And one of the things that, and I remember saying this to Ms. Peterson, and I don't think I said it in a very artful way, and I want to apologize as I went through it. But we do have this value of wanting to be accessible. We want our leaders to be accessible. And I don't know that, I think we need to look at the size of the Met Council in such a way that it's accessible as well as being functional. And I don't know that speed in making decisions is always the top priority, right? It's making sure that we have collaboration, consensus. There's a word I'm looking for, Mr. Chair. I can't think of it.
Accountability?
No, but compromise is the word I'm thinking of, that we come to a compromise that everyone can live with. Maybe they don't love every part of it, but they can live with it. And even here in the legislature, our work is messy. The House, you know, I remember, you know, even in a trifecta, the House and the Senate don't see eye to eye. but we get our work done and we get it done in a very thoughtful way. And so I would be concerned too much focusing on efficiency, and I think we really need to focus on the accountability. I think we need to focus on the collaboration. Those were the two values that I heard come from many of these presentations, and I think kind of fits with what I've heard most of the body talk about. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will finally end my lengthy
No,
comments.
it's really great to hear. You know, what was really nice about today, and as we wrap up, I think we have Professor Orfield. Was there anyone else that wanted to say? Representative Koznick, so. Okay. Okay, let's see. I just want to have order here, and we are at time, so we'll go a few minutes over. But first of all, thank you, Senator Pratt, because that was really helpful to hear your thoughts and comments. And so we're going to have Representative Orfield, Representative Koznick, and Ms. Paddock will have the last word today. So, Professor Orfield.
I just wanted to, endorse the comments of Senator Pratt about this, about being flexible and thinking about all these ideas fitting together. I mean, in a certain sense, we talk about a vision for what the Met Council is, and I might not agree with with Senator Pratt on everything, but I would certainly want his voice to be heard, and I'd like mine to be heard, in that same sense. I mean, if you talk about vision, I might have a different vision than Representative Koznick has about the region. And it may be hard for us to exactly agree on that vision, but if we're both heard, then we can be part of that, whatever decision it is. I mean, one thing you could think about, just as an idea, and I'll stop, is maybe you'd have one part of the council would be exactly or very similar to what Senator Pratt had, and another part be elected directly. This is kind of what the framers of our country did, is they had one body represent the people and one body represent the states. And it was a way that both of those interests were heard, because the people have a role in this. I mean, I think it's crazy to say that everything that Senator Pratt said is true. I mean, the counties, the cities, the townships, they have issues all the time, and they should be heard. But the people also have some issues here, and it's also their government. So if you could think about how both of those things could fit together, maybe you could do something like the Constitution, which was a more perfect union.
We'll have a regional constitutional convention. Okay, Representative Koznick, and no, I'm not done being flippant. I do feel that we have to be reminded that I think this came up at a very early meeting, that the only constraint we have is that, right? So, is making sure that we are whatever we come up with passes muster constitutionally, right? That's the.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then Ms. Paddock.
Thank you. And Senator Pratt, I was looking for a little clarification. I agreed with almost all of what you've said, and accountability and collaboration are important components. And a little bit to Professor Orfield and talk about the governance and that. The democracy is messy and slow and designed to be that way to get the best product and outcome. When you said we're not as concerned about efficiency, you're talking about just the process of democracy and coming up with ideas in regional, not necessarily delivery of services in terms of efficiency of the transit system or any other aspect of policy.
Thank you, Representative Koznick, and you're absolutely correct, because there's a customer service function when it comes to wastewater currently, when it comes to transit, where we need to be flexible. But, as I think about being on the Prior Lake 2040 plan, when I think about, when I was on the school board and we set our first strategic plan, it wasn't the plan of the school board, it wasn't the plan of the city council, it was the plan of the of the stakeholders, right? It was the plan of the constituencies. And the planning, I think, is where we have to not be fast. We have to be thoughtful.
Thank you. That's how I interpreted your comments, I thought, but just wanted to clarify, because I think efficiency of the services and to our taxpayers, whether they're cities, counties, or individual homeowners and constituents, is important. So thank you for clarifying that.
Thanks. We will conclude with a comment from Ms. Paddock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just am really interested in what you said, Senator Pratt, and I particularly, in terms of process, like the phrase, "What are we solving for?" And you said we should be solving for collaboration, and I think you said for accountability and/or accessibility. I'm not sure if those are the same things, but I think that's a good model for us to continue to discuss. And I would suggest that, first of all, I think we do need to nail down what we all think the problems are. I mean, we've sort of danced around that. And can we find at the next meeting, can we identify in broad terms what the problems are? I made a list of ones that I heard expressed around the table today, certainly credibility, and I think there's unanimous consent on that. Another problem that was expressed by some people is we're enmeshed with the governor's agenda, staff-driven, continuity, not sure what the regional vision is, lack of collaboration. So those were some of the problems. And so I would suggest that we, at the next meeting, come to some consensus. What can we agree on? And then once we identify them, how do we solve them for collaboration and accessibility and accountability?
Well, thank you, Ms. Paddock, and I think you did tee up, I was going to conclude our meeting here by giving a preview of the next meeting. And I think you did tee up, I think, what we need to do next time. I want to have, Vice Chair Pat and I will have a discussion this week about process moving forward. But I do feel that what you laid out, Ms. Paddock, is excellent and I think does provide a transition from this meeting into our next meeting. So, because what we do need to do, this will be our last meeting next week before the holidays. And what I would like to come out of our next meeting with is, not only getting at some of the questions that you raised, Ms. Paddock, in terms of really defining the problem a little more clearly, but then a process for the month of January by which we can then come to a decision and make some recommendations, actually for the beginning part of January, because Ms. Kohler needs to help us draft a report. So that's really for next week. And then the other part we're going to spend a little bit of time next week on, and the former mayor of Portland referenced this, Mayor Hales. He referenced the home rule charter process that Portland went through, and we do have a national expert on that process coming in to, again, talk to us briefly. That is an option for us in terms of moving forward. It was the Senate position. So we'll talk about that, but then we're going to spend the bulk of our time following up this discussion today. Really want to thank the members for a really good discussion today. I think we got some issues out on the table. I think everybody really contributed very, very well who spoke and others who were listening. So I wanted to thank the task force for an especially good meeting today and look forward to continuing the conversation next week. And with that, we are adjourned.
Ricky.